Hello and welcome to day 86 of the Not Alone Today chronological Bible reading plan. Today we'll be reading 1 Samuel chapter 17 to 19, but we'll be ending at verse 17 in chapter 19. And we'll be using the English Standard Version.
Chapter 17. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Socoh and Azekah in Ephes Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered, and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And his shield-bearer went before him. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid.
Now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to the battle, and the name of the 3 sons who went to battle were Eliab the firstborn, and next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening.
And Jesse said to David his son, "Take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain, and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them."
Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning and led the sheep with a keeper, and took the provisions and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, and ran to the ranks, and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines, and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him.
All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel." And David said to the men who stood by him, "What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And the people answered him in the same way, "So shall it be done to the man who kills him."
Now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the man. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, "Why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your hearts, for you have come down to see the battle." And David said, "What have I done now? Was it not but a word? And he turned away from him toward another, and spoke in the same way. And the people answered him again as before.
When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God." And David said, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you."
Then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head, and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor. And he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot go with this, for I have not tested them." So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in his shepherd pouch. A sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine.
And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David, with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog, that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand."
When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground.
So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine, and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded Philistines fell on the way from Shariam as far as Gath and Ekron. And the people of Israel came back from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camp. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent.
As soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this youth?" And Abner said, "As your soul lives, O king, I do not know." And the king said, "Inquire whose son the boy is." And as soon as David returned from the striking down of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant, Jesse the Bethlehemite."
Chapter 18. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword and his bow and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants.
As they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated. Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s.
And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom?" And Saul hid David from that day on.
The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had a spear in his hand, and Saul heard the spear, for he thought, "I will pin David to the wall." But David evaded him twice.
Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them.
Then Saul said to David, "Here is my elder daughter, Merab. I give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battle." For Saul thought, "Let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him." And David said to Saul, "Who am I and who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be the son-in-law to the king?" By the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel, the Meholatite, for a wife.
Now Saul's daughter Michal loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, "Let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." Therefore Saul said to David a second time, "You shall now be my son-in-law." And Saul commanded his servants, "Speak to David in private and say, 'Behold, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now then, become the king's son-in-law.'" And Saul's servants spoke those words in the ears of David. And David said, "Does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and have no reputation?" And the servants of Saul told him, "Thus and so did David speak." Then Saul said, "Thus shall you say to David, 'The king desires no bride price except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies.'" Now Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David arose and went, along with his men, and killed 200 of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number, to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal for a wife. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually.
Then the commanders of the Philistines came to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was highly esteemed.
Chapter 19. And Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants, that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, "Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are. And I will speak to my father about you. And if I learn anything, I will tell you." And Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father and said to him, "Let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have brought good to you. For he took his life in his hand and struck down the Philistine. And the Lord worked a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause?" And Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death." And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan reported to him all these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before.
And there was war again. And David went out and fought with the Philistines, and struck them down with a great blow, so that they fled before him. Then a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul, as he sat in his house with a spear in his hand, and David was playing the lyre. And Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul, so that he struck the spear into the wall. And David fled and escaped that night.
Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, that he might kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, told him, "If you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. Michal took an image and laid it on the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair at its head, and covered it with the clothes. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, "He is sick." Then Saul sent the messengers to see David, saying, "Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him." And when the messengers came in, behold, the image was in the bed, with the pillow of goat's hair at its head. Saul said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me thus, and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped?" And Michal answered Saul, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I kill you?'" This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Here is a quick summary of the 2.5 chapters we've read so far. In chapter 17, we read about David and Goliath. Goliath was called a champion, which is the only time champion was mentioned in the Old Testament. It was tall, it was huge, and it wanted a combat with the Israelites. And then David's 3 older brothers were in the battle, but David was not. He was tending his father's sheep in Bethlehem. But Jesse often sent David to care for his brother, like take food to them. One day when David went there, he heard what Goliath said, how he defied the Israelites. Then he talked to people about it. His brother Eliab heard him, and he said, why are you saying this? I know you have presumptions, that you have evil in your heart. But David did not mind him. He just turned to another person and said it until what he's saying reached Saul's ears. Then he convinced Saul that he would go to the battle and fight Goliath. Saul gave him his armor. David could not wear them because he had not tested them. So he just went with his shepherd garments, and he won. He was able to kill Goliath and brought the head of Goliath to Saul. But Saul did not know who he was, which was very, very curious. In chapter 18, we read about how Jonathan's soul was knit to the soul of David, and that he loved him very much. Because of David's success, Saul set him over his men of war, and this is where Saul's jealousy started. When they were coming home, the women were singing and dancing. Then they said, "Saul has struck down 1,000 and David is 10,000s. And this made Saul very angry. And that day he started eyeing David. And he tried killing David with a spear, but David evaded him twice. And then Saul removed David from his presence and made him a commander over 1,000. And then he promised David that David would marry one of his daughters called Merab. But somehow didn't give Merab to David. But when Saul heard that Michal loved David, he agreed that David would indeed become his son-in-law. But then all the battles that David went to, from then on, he was successful and his name was highly esteemed within Israel. Chapter 19, the 17 verses that we read, talked about how Saul again sought to kill David. And when a harmful spirit came upon Saul, he tried to kill David, and David escaped, but this time David fled from him. Saul again tried to kill him in his house, but then his wife Michal told him about it and he escaped. That was the last thing we read about in chapter 19. Going to 17, what stood out to you, my love?
Yes, the popular story of David and Goliath. So popular that even in secular conversations, now we talk of Goliath. Remember the TV series Goliath. The first thing that stood out is in verses 17 and 18, where Jesse sent David on this errand that would eventually become a defining moment in his life's journey and destiny. And I remember when we were studying Genesis, the story of, I think this was Genesis 37, the story of when Jacob sent Joseph to go look for his brothers and bring back word. It's a similar kind of experience. That journey would eventually be a defining moment for Joseph. And I just see all that from the perspective of, being available to be sent. Especially for those of us still in our prime, in our youthful years. Make yourself available to be sent, because you never can tell that errand, that assignment, that task, that go do this for me, that volunteering experience that will become indeed very pivotal for your life's journey and fulfillment. I can trace such many significant errand moments that had been pregnant with destiny in my own journey in my few decades on earth. And I'm always quick to say to young people, make yourself available. Sometimes that will feel like being used. And what does it matter if it will be being used into destiny, being used into a sense that would eventually become, being used for God's glory. So make yourself available. You never can tell what errand will push you into destiny. Will be the first thing that stood out to me. How about you?
The main thing that stood out to me was the fact that in chapter 16, we read about how that David becomes Saul's armor bearer. Therefore, indicating that David then would be a man of war. When there's a war, David should be around Saul, bearing his armor. But it's quite interesting that his father did not send him to battle, but made him feed the sheep in Bethlehem, and then sent him back and forth to go take food to his brother. Again, the relationship between David's father and him is very unclear. Yeah, so that was quite interesting to me. And the part that stood out to me was Goliath has been defying the army of the Israelites for 40 days. We read that morning and evening it would take a stand. And they've been hearing it. But on the day that David heard him, his anger was sparked. I don't know if it was the fact that he has been anointed, and that was why he thought, this is not right. Because if battalions have been hearing these defying words, and no one was spurred to action, and it was just him that heard it and that was spurred to action, it reads to me that it ties up with what happened with him in chapter 16 when he was anointed as king over Israel. Yeah.
Interesting. I also find it, of course, there are, if you weigh commentaries here and there seems to be a bit of a discrepancy between the transition from chapter 16 where we left off into this chapter 17. And that has been explained from different perspectives from various Bible scholars, especially textual Bible scholars. Some will say that actually in the oldest manuscripts, there is a bit of a gap between the story. So there is a missing sort of part between chapter 16 and 17 and 18. And when chapter 17 is trying to bridge that together by merging two traditions or two versions of what has been popular in oral history about David and Goliath to reconcile that account. Be that as it may, I don't know if that's the case or not. But the story itself of David fighting Goliath is definitely factual, and there are many, many other sources to confirm that. The other thing that stood out to me really is conversation at the end of that chapter about identity for David. After he had done this, and Saul was asking, whose son is this youth? I know I've seen him around. He's my hammer bearer. He's the one that plays the lyre and all that. But really, whose son is this youth? And I took it beyond the literal sense of what the question is saying to actually be a question of identity at the very depth of what that means. And the response of David in the last verse 58, is, I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. And I had to look up the meaning of Jesse in the Hebrew, and I saw it's God's gift. I am the son of the gift of God. I am the son of the grace of God. I am the product of the grace of God. In that sense, Bethlehem is the house of bread. I am the product of the grace that comes from the very house of God. The house of God is the house of bread, is the house of the word in that sense. So all that's to say, for young people, again, root yourself in the word. Saturate yourself in the grace of God. Let the grace of God percolate all about you. And that happens, amongst other things, by just regular, daily dwelling in the word. David will go on to write, the psalmist that wrote that portion in Psalm 119 and verse 11, how can a young man cleanse his ways? He says, by taking heed to the word of God. That's verse 9, actually. And then in verse 11, it says, your word have I hid in my heart, that I may not sin against you. So we are sons of Jesus. We are sons of God's gift, God's grace, God's favor, products of the grace of God. And we should rise into that identity and embrace it with both hands.
Chapter 18, what stood out to me was this. It's always been interesting why the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. That kind of a friendship, I don't know, and I'm in awe of. It takes a person who's an introvert to be so, Like, I personally don't know deep friendship. But whenever I hear the story of how Jonathan, gave his all to David, and it was a pure relationship. It's not the one where one person is competing with the other. It was purely pure. And I found that very intriguing to know that you can have such a friend, that it's possible. I think it's possibility that intrigues me more than anything.
And of course, even in this case, this is Jonathan also making himself vulnerable, because by that gesture of stripping himself of the robe that was on him and the armor and the sword and all that, is effectively saying, I love you so much and acknowledge what God is doing in your life so much that I'm reading myself off of my princely status and bequeathing it to you. Yeah, it's a gesture that is saying, in a sense, you are now the prince. You are now the heir apparent to the throne,
is
not
that right?
me. Yeah, it's in the cultural sense of the day. It's a significant gesture. It's not just that he dashed him his clothes or his sword or his armor. It's actually a statement. It's almost like a covenant.
Really?
So when they say the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, it's a deep friendship that is covenantal in a sense. You remember that David would eventually say, "Is there anybody left in the family of Jonathan that I can fulfill, in a sense, my part of that covenant?" It's we're loving each other to the death. And of course, there are people that have read all sorts of things that the Bible did not say into this, and wrote stories about both of them being homosexuals and things like that. There's nothing like that in this story. Like you said, it's a pure, holy friendship, but one where the other party is not afraid to make... it's an embodiment of Philippians, I think, chapter 2, verse 3, that says you should reckon the other person as being more important than you. David did not at any time look down on Jonathan. Why would he anyways? He was a poor shepherd boy. Jonathan is the prince. But at the same time, Jonathan esteemed David as being of more significance than himself by this very gesture, to say, I can acknowledge that you are not just a boy. there is something going on here in your life and in your story, that the best thing I can do as someone that also serves Yahweh is to actually say, I respect it, and I choose to say, if there should be a heir apparent to the throne, it's not going to be me. It's going to be you, because you are more deserving of it than me. So yeah, it's quite loaded a gesture.
It is.
I'm struck by the song of the women. I don't want to blame the women, but why would you sing such a song?
Because it's true. Papa Shai, if you remember,
Yeah.
whenever they win war,
Yes.
they often sing. When Deborah won the war, and it was even not just Deborah, it was Barak on all of them. Like it's the tradition, so to say, that when they win a victory, they would sing.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that we've read about the songs they sing, it's often about what has happened.
An account of it.
An account of it. So in a sense, I'm just trying to validate the women's song.
Okay.
But whilst I was speaking, what I noticed is that nowhere did they attribute the victory to God. They were more focused on the people, on the men, what David did as compared to what Saul did. But nowhere did they say, God gave us this victory. But remembering from the other songs we've read about, they always come back. After they said the fact, they'll come back to, God did this. Moses' song, God did this. Miriam, Moses, Deborah, Hannah. It was they all came back to God. But at this time, the women of Israel did not attribute the victory to God, rather to men.
And that's the beginning of an unending cycle of tension, at least unending so far. And we'll see how the story unfolds shortly. Also in that chapter, verse 14 says, and David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him, giving us yet again a reiteration of the formula for success, the presence of God. The same was said about Joseph. There are so many parallels really between the life of David and Joseph. And in the case of Joseph, it was said in Genesis 39 as well, a couple of times in that chapter alone, that Joseph prospered in all that he did, for God was with him. And so let's go with God into the journeys ahead of us. Yeah, chapter 19, what stood out to you?
To be honest, what stood out to me in 19, whenever I read that part that says, and a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul, it makes me feel sorry for Saul. Because we've read it like twice now.
Yeah.
As though Saul was being used. Yes, he put himself up for that. He started to do things that were not in God's way. So he opened himself for this wrongness. But then, it's one thing to read that evil spirit just came upon Saul. But this harmful spirit was from the Lord.
Yeah. Indeed. The very striking thing about that is the very first time it would even be referenced that, a harmful spirit, or some versions would say an evil spirit from the Lord came upon Saul, was immediately after it was said that David was anointed and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. And so it's almost, it began as a way of contrasting what is going on here. What we began to read in chapter 17, actually begins to answer one of the big questions that chapter 16 may pose. And that's the question of, what's so special about David that God said, I have chosen a man after my own heart? And so we see very immediately after that in chapter 17, one of the big answers to that question is, he has a different spirit. All the army of Israel were cowering for 40 days. He comes and hears a conversation once, and his response was immediately different from everybody's response for the past 7 weeks. This is an uncircumcised person. This is someone that he has no part whatsoever in the covenant of Yahweh with the Israelites. How can such a person, by any means, stand and believe that he has an authority to put God's people under threat? It shouldn't be heard of. And he understood that it's actually not a battle of swords. That also struck me because it's it's referenced in, I think, chapter 16 or 15, that it is only in Philistine that you can get to sharpen all these instruments. They've monopolized that to the point where the weapons that most Israelites now have is just farming instruments that they go to sharpen with the Philistines at a very high price. And so most Israelites do not have swords. It's only Saul and Jonathan that had swords. And David said, I have not come to fight you with swords. I have come to fight you recognizing that the battle is the Lord. So I've not come with this or that, but I've come in the name of the Lord. So this continual reference to a harmful spirit from the Lord is just helping us to see further and further how Saul continued to just distance himself from the reality of that covenant and all the privileges that come with him having been anointed few chapters earlier, and even to the point of him prophesying, and people are saying, has Saul become a prophet? Is Saul also numbered amongst the prophets? He has come a long way from that just by repeated disobediences. So it's quite striking. I know for some people it might be difficult reconciling. How would you say a harmful spirit comes from the Lord? But the reality of the fact is there is nothing that he is not God over. He is king over everything. He is Lord over everything. And Saul himself, by his choices, has opened himself up for such a judgment as this. And we continue to see that instability throughout the rest of his story. One moment is happy and joyful. The next moment is throwing spears. The next moment is saying, I will kill David. The next moment is saying, I swear by the Lord, as long as the Lord lives, I'm not going to put him to death. And it's just living as if he's no longer in control of his senses. And that's the reality of it, really. It's just such a sad story for Saul.
Thank you.
And this is just the beginning, in a sense, especially as far as David's story is concerned. We are gradually coming to the end of Saul's story, but this is just the beginning for David's story. And we'll turn the page on day 87 to continue to consider what happens next. But till then, just remember,
you're not alone
today. God bless you.
God bless you.